Welcome to Bigfoot
and the Bunny.
This is a couple's journey into the mysterious,
the unknown, and the paranormal.
I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm your host, Kristen Johnson.
Together we are Bigfoot and the Bunny.
Hi, welcome to Bigfoot and the Bunny. I'm your host, Kristen Johnson.
And I'm Chris Carr. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.
How are you guys doing tonight? We've got a great show for you and got some news, right, Chris?
Some news.
We got some news.
Our podcast, Dark Horse Paranormal.
You say that like it's a question.
Well, yeah, I thought you were going to feel like I asked if I was pregnant or something. The way you said it, you know?
Yeah.
So we got some news.
Well, that would certainly be paranormal.
Lots of news, but okay, yeah, that's the one.
So, yeah, we're getting ready to finally release our Dark Horse Paranormal podcast.
In 3 months of research and factoids and all kinds of stuff, and that's why it took so long.
And you lucky listeners have been able to hear some of it on this live show, Bigfoot and the Bunny, about Native American hauntings. And it's going to consist of a lot of history and some great paranormal clips from Anawan Rock in Rehoboth, Massachusetts, the very haunted Rehoboth, Massachusetts, and also the Native American burial ground in Grafton.
That's right.
Yeah. So as a teaser to you folks, to help you remember, we got one clip from it that I think we played on the show and one of the other Bigfoot and the Bunnies a long time ago. But if you could play that for us, Joe. This is called Ghosts.
Who lives here? Who lives here?
You back, babe.
Awesome. Thank you.
It says, and it's one of the funniest clips ever, the neighbors think I'm a ghost. And Chris asks, who lives here? And they come back and say, ghosts.
I love that clip.
I did too. It's right up there with the sangria clip. What's her name? Drunk. Ghosts know us too well.
That's right. We like to have a good time with our parents.
Yes.
We've got a great show for you guys tonight. We have the legendary, and you'll appreciate me calling it legendary, Chris Balzano, author of Dark Woods, Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle. He's the guy that brought the name Pukwudgie up into the mainstream.
My 12-year-old son loves this. He's telling Chris and I.
Yeah. I was talking to Zoe earlier, and she actually thinks she saw a Pukwudgie. And I forgot she had told me the story when she was about 12 years old in Somerset. So she's out there listening tonight. And Chris, are you there with us?
Nice.
I am here. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.
The only reason I allow you to even attempt to call me legendary is that we finish all of our broadcasts on the podcast I do now called Tripping on Legends. We end every broadcast with "May all your trips be legendary." So I'm going to allow it tonight, but please don't let my head get too big.
See, I knew that word popped up for some reason. I knew
it does, yes. And you know what? We did it for about a year until I realized that I had watched every single episode of How I Met Your Mother, and that's where it comes from. It just like subconsciously planted itself in my head, and so. I've got Barney. I'm channeling Barney every episode we do. So
I love that show. I know that. It's awesome.
Such a collective consciousness. Absolutely.
Yes. So it's slipped in there somewhere. I didn't even realize it until about a year into doing the show that I'm like, oh, even the way we pause and we sometimes play with it, like it works like that. So.
I love your podcast. How long have you been doing that podcast for?
That one, we're going on about, I think, 4 years now doing that.
Wow.
Yeah. It's we're officially, I think, 66 episodes in, but we also have like a lot of what we call not numbered. They're still canon in our legends, but they're not necessarily what we call numbered episodes. And then, of course, we've got probably now about 40 live shows that we've done. So once you mix that all in, I think we've been doing it maybe 3.5 years.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's great.
Nice. And you were the content director for Spooky South Coast for a number of years, right?
I was.
Are you still?
No, I'm not anymore. I guess you could say maybe sometimes outside advisor to Spooky South Coast, and of course, always in contact with Tim Weisberg, who does Midnight in the Desert now as well. But yeah, I think their fourth or fifth guest back in the day. I mean, they're on for 12, 13 years now. I was their first guest. And then I kept getting called out there. Of course, that's in the Bridgewater Triangle. There's where they're broadcasting out of. And and it just all of a sudden, especially because Tim and I mesh so well, that I was like, you know what? Like, I can help you guys with this. I can help you guys with that. So over the years, I was in charge of booking guests, and I used to do a thing called the Balzano Breakdown, where I would just come in and talk about a paranormal issue or some interesting thing happening in the news, because I did the news for them. I did the news for Ghost Village for a while, and so it was all kind of an advisory role, and then of course they would get me on the air, and every single time I'd be like, I can't keep up with these guys, they're too good, but it always made for a good mesh.
That was a very good mesh.
Yeah.
And speaking of Spooky Villages, that's Jeff Belanger, and that's really some history there. If I recall, that's pretty much the first site that was out there kind of collecting these ghost stories and locations.
We did an episode about one of our live episodes about what is the biggest moment in the paranormal, and we went back and forth, and we had some people call up and give theirs, and mine was firmly like Halloween 1999, the launching of Ghost Village, and just what that did for the paranormal, just as it was becoming popular 5 years before Ghost Hunters was on the air, and so it was firmly planted as the website to go to, and I really honestly feel that without Ghost Village having kind of put its flag in the ground back then, a lot of the connections and the paranormal resources that we have now wouldn't exist. Like, it really was the first trusted paranormal website that covered all kinds of different things.
Yes, it was. And certainly we've come a long way since. And I can speak to your book, Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, being a first ghost hunting type book that I purchased.
Yep.
Real? Well, so you can't get your money back now. It's too late.
Why would it be labeled that way? I liked Hans Holzer and that kind of stuff growing up. And I have a background in like what they would call like an occultist today and that kind of stuff. So I always liked paranormal. But the first book I actually got this said, how do you go out and do this on this kind of other level, or it's what seemed like a new thing, was yours. So thank you.
You're welcome. When I wrote that book, I really was looking for a resource that would kind of collect all of what different people were doing. And so I wanted all these different opinions. I wanted all these different methods that other people were using. And it's odd that by doing that book, I became more of a researcher into paranormal investigators than the paranormal. I credit that book with making me stop investigating, actually, because there were just so many ideas in that book that I explored that afterwards I was like, wait a minute here. Or I was a little bit fed up with some of the aspects of the paranormal. I stepped away a little bit after that book, actually. But it has a companion one, which people don't usually buy, which is Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film.
Right, a much harder thing to do.
Right, and a much harder thing to kind of try to formalize, right? I mean, I finished, because people now even still send me their pictures of ghosts, and I'm like, I literally wrote a book on it, or the book on it, although most people wouldn't consider it the book on it, but, and I still can't tell whether that's a ghost or not. It's so ambiguous, it's so confusing, and of course, anyone with technology, and that was almost 10 years ago, anyone with the slightest bit of technology can fake anything. And so you have to naturally assume that everything is, there's everything is skeptic up to, scrutiny that can't be, passed off because it's like, well, you ultimately could have faked it. And so therefore your ghost picture is horrible.
Right. It's the Polaroids are really good for that though.
Right. I like the Polaroids and more old school photography, and it's the same with
Right.
UFO sightings. It's
Right.
like now, like how hard is that to do? You know what I mean?
Right,
Not hard at all. Right.
But unless you're holding that picture or holding that Polaroid literally in your hand, you still won't believe that it's, it could have, oh, well, you took a picture of the picture for me. You could have done anything to it. So those kind of debates were really becoming boring to me, which was part of the reason also where I was like, you know what? Evidence is kind of not what I'm experiencing anymore, not what I want to experience anymore. So
it's just data at this point, right?
That's
Just,
at the end of the day.
It's tough. You can go back to the Victorian ages and the old ectoplasm photography that was towels and different things that they staged.
Right. Or even, slow exposures and things like that intentionally done to appear ghostly. And, and that's fine. And the hard part is that people who may be genuine get lost in the shuffle of that. And so you have to kind of say, it could be. Nice job, nice picture.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's where you leave it, because once you say something as someone who has written a book or someone who's out there, then it's like, officially endorsed by Balzano, and that's the kind of stamp that I don't want to have going around.
Right.
And it is a tough thing, and it's like your beliefs, can be based on what you see on TV or just what your general realm of beliefs are, and over time that can change. I'm more drawn to like the cryptid thing now than I was, say 10 years ago, where I just kind of put up a wall and just said no.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there's no way, if you've been doing this for any amount of time, and I've been officially doing this kind of like since 94, 95, and you haven't swayed and you haven't moved your opinion on some things, and your needle hasn't changed on your opinion on other things, then you're just kind of doing it with blinders. So anyone who has an open mind has to have been impacted by things that happen along the way. And sometimes that points us in the direction of something entirely different, or it points us, it laser focuses us on something more like cryptids or UFOs or specific kinds of hauntings, things like that. So if you don't change your opinion over 25 years, then you're just stubborn.
Yeah, you're really stubborn, and you probably haven't learned anything,
Right?
Or experienced much, because it's the experiences that really start to sway it.
As it should be. Yeah.
Yeah. Something happens to you, and you go, "Oh my God, I really cannot explain that."
Right.
And I like that the envelope's getting pushed a little bit more now. Folks like from Hellier are doing some kind of cool stuff. We like that
method.
The Estes method is a cool addition.
Chris and I are starting to do that.
Yeah, we've been playing around with that, and we actually want to work aromatherapy into that.
Yes.
And then see where that goes to get into more of a trance state. And speaking of cryptids, you did bring the Pukwudgie into the mainstream. And I know you've spoken endlessly about it. So
I don't mind
with it, but
I guess
for our listeners who don't know, maybe you could tell them what a Pukwudgie is.
Sure. I guess I should put a big disclaimer ahead of this, is that I reluctantly take credit for putting it more out into the mainstream. But it's important to note that, I didn't invent the Pukwudgie. I just kind of put them on the internet for the first time, really. And then, of course, it's just completely exploded in the last 15 years. It's crazy.
Yes. Made it into Harry Potter movies.
We don't talk about Harry Potter, okay? Because she doesn't pay me anything.
I have a Brian Stroud fairy book, and it literally has a Pukwudgie in it.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny because when I first started doing research, so for me, when I was writing Dark Woods, which is about Freetown, Massachusetts, several people contacted me with similar reports of a small troll-like creature about 3 foot high. Both times once was in a parking lot near in the Freetown State Forest. The other was walking along, and they'd both come across this little creature, and the creature was stumbled upon. So it wasn't like they were looking for anything, and there was like that moment of surprise, and then it disappeared. And in both cases, several days later, only one time, despite the thing I recently posted that it happened multiple times to these people over a course of weeks and years, that same creature appered to one person, once again, in a different parking lot, just kind of staring at them, smiling almost. And the other one appeared in a second floor window, staring into her bedroom with the same kind of look of, I always describe it as You might know where I am, but I definitely know where you are.
Oh, that's great. Too.
And I couldn't explain what that was. I had heard of a kind of a similar sighting in Framingham, Massachusetts. And so I had all these things, and I'm like, what could this thing possibly be? And I came across in Joe Citro's book, Passing Strange, a quick reference to something called a Pukwudgie. And as a matter of fact, in his book, he only mentions it to say the Dover Demon case is not a Pukwudgie. And it was interesting because the way Joe put it out there was like, because people are automatically going to jump to Pukwudgie. And I'm like,
Right.
What? Like, and so,
especially then, right?
Right. And so I did a little research, and the only thing I could find was the kids' book, The Good Giant and the Bad Puckwudgies. That was literally the only reference to it on the internet whatsoever at that time. Bought the book. It's a little kid's book. I still have it. I bring it to class all the time. I'm a teacher to show the kids and kind of, do some research things with it. And then in the back, it says, this story is based on something in the Narrow Land. And so I went and I bought the book, The Narrow Land, and then it just shot off. And I'm like, this is what these people are talking about. This little creature who in Wampanoag folklore was a trickster spirit, who at some point changes to become really violent towards the Wampanoag, is something that people are still experiencing. And the more I put out there, the more people are saying, well, there's something similar in this area, and there's something similar in this area. And so it really kind of just started to develop and grow and grow and grow. And of course, at some point, you have to realize that this is just the Wampanoag's word. And actually, I found out that it's more than that if you want me to get into it. This is just the Wampanoag's word for this thing, which has appeared in multiple cultures, in multiple countries, and multiple continents. And it's not anything new. It's just what they call it. And it's because of its accessibility.
For it?
It's quoted as being an Algonquin word.
Okay.
Right.
And I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that.
Oh, okay.
I think it's a word that comes into Algonquin language to describe it. So I guess I should say, one of my bucket lists, because everyone's got bucket list places they want to go. I'm sure you guys have places you're like, paranormally, I need to get to this place. I need to get to that place.
Absolutely. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mine was Indiana, okay? Not that exciting. But the only other book that was published pre-me that has a mention of Puckwudgies came from this place called Mound State Park in Indiana. And it had been published years ago. I mean, decades before Joe Citro had talked about it and Lauren Coleman had mentioned it. This guy wrote an entire book on Puckwudgies in this area of Indiana. And when I went there, I just happened to go there on a day that they had this person with like 3 doctorates was working. She was like a park advisor, and we sat down with her for about 3 hours. And one of the things that she talked about was this place, this Mound State Park in Indiana, was almost like a ritual meeting ground where tribes from all across the country who were in a loose federation would come and bury their most honored dead, hence the mounds,
Right.
but then also converse and also interact. And of course, there was no common language among them all. And so there was a little bit of borrowedness happening between these different tribes and these different nations. And what I discovered was that the word Pukwudgie was actually used in a kind of general sense to describe the dealings that all of these different tribes had with this same creature who had basically the same traits. And so you find that there are actually tribes all across the country that use the word Pukwudgie. And so I think it comes in the same way we might say monster, or we might say dog, but there are different breeds of dog.
Sure.
Which
All our words have derivations from something else anyhow.
Right.
Exactly. And so, what I discovered, because one thing I could never settle was, for example, an experience that I had in one place in New Hampshire, we might talk about a little later. The Pukwudgie there was different than the Puckwudgies in the Triangle, which was different than the Pukwudgie in Framingham. They all had the same basic elements, but parts of the physical description. And then if you've seen the Bridgewater Triangle documentary, the infamous "You Want You" that appears in that one.
Yes, I saw that.
Is also different from other ones. And I couldn't figure out why if these were all Puckwudgies, why do they look different enough to be different things? And it was kind of this trip to Indiana that kind of revealed that to me. I was like, oh, you know what? This is like a general term that these different tribes adopted to try to explain the same thing.
Very interesting. Now, other cultures like Ireland, the Irish, for example, would have, very similar
I don't know. I'm online.
traditions. The fairies of Ireland are similar, at least in their habits. In their vengeance, I guess. That like the Pukwudgies, people in Ireland have diverted roads because of the fairy mounds and the fairy rings that they built originally, I guess, for cattle. And you probably know more about this than I do. That supposedly were taken over by fairies, and they've actually blamed them for destruction of roads or moved the roads around in certain towns and that sort of thing to not disturb them.
Yeah, they were blind enough to disturb them in the first place. I think the mounds came much before the roads came, and they discovered that, when they were going through these kinds of things, and this is something I come across a lot here in Florida, more than in New England, the disruption of these mounds really causes some nasty things to happen. And it's not unusual for folklore to develop around where mounds have been disturbed. We have this great, it's built on a Native American burial ground. But sometimes in throwing that out there, we forget about the mounds, which is actually probably, there are more, I would say, documented cases, especially here in Florida, of mound disruption causing paranormal activity than actually building on, bodies that were buried in the ground.
Wow.
Right. That was a big feature of movies in the 70s and 80s, and even Amityville, supposedly. At least some people say that it could have been buried on a burial ground. So I think that may have been debunked, but yeah.
So I'm not sure if you've ever read my book Haunted Objects, but if you have, you should know we never mention the A case in an interview with me because bad things will happen to your podcast. So we have to avoid that. I mean, that's a curse. Right. I'm not joking either. That's a curse word for me as soon as the A word comes out there. So we're going to forget that you mentioned that and move on. But there's definitely some nastiness connected.
Okay.
Because we already have ghosts in the machine every time. So
yeah, we have enough technical difficulties.
It's kind of like always kind of what happened to you. You experienced, Chris, with the lights going out twice.
Exactly.
Yes, that's us all the time.
Well, that was, we've had entire episodes of Spooky South Coast derailed because of that. So we try not to mention the A case whenever possible.
Okay. We'll remember that. Moving on. You're familiar with the Wampanoags. How about the Nipmucks? I really wanted your to hear what you had to say about the Nipmucks and what is it, Leicester? Spider Gates.
Is that Nipmunks?
Nipmunks.
Well,
MIP.
Spider Gates is a Quaker cemetery.
Yes.
But that property was sold to the white man by the Nipmuc tribe.
Okay, all right.
To New York investors who split it up and eventually was bought by certain Quakers, that tract of land that became Friends Cemetery.
So, that is
very haunted territory.
Yes.
Yeah. And in the early days of me getting into this, so we're talking late 90s, early 2000s, that was the place. You know what I'm saying? That was the place everyone wanted to go to. That's the place that everyone had, had this mystique to it. And it's really kind of fallen out of consciousness of people. And I think intentionally, they have done everything they can to discourage people from going there.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of, it's weird because usually when something like that happens, take like Dogtown, not Dogtown, Dudleyville in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
The more they tell you to not go in there, the more people go in and the more the mystique goes. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because Spider Gates has done the exact opposite. It's really fallen out of the paranormal mind. People don't, as far as I know, talk about it anymore.
They shouldn't.
Yeah, we're going to encourage them not to. There is a large sign out front that does tell you not to paranormal investigate, and you're not allowed there at night.
No videos.
Which is heavily regulated by the local police. And
yes.
We have only visited during day hours, with the very bestest of intentions.
Did you ever happen to come across anything in the daytime there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
That's why we are telling people not to go to this place.
Yes, we have
It's-
an ongoing thing with that.
Now-
If you follow our show.
Now,
you
it's
know
funny.
about-
It's funny because I live in Florida now. I moved about 11 years ago now, almost 12. Don't tell people I said that though. And it wasn't open. The one time I got there, I would love to tell you that story. I got busted and we got along. We got shipped off, but there wasn't a sign posted or anything like that. It still kind of was one of those places people were sneaking into, and there was nothing posted about it. And there was, you weren't supposed to go there. But if you did, you just got shuffled along. But there definitely wasn't anything posted to not go in there for investigation.
Yeah, it quite clearly states that. And
It's-
people still go there and they visit
Yeah.
it, and it's open to the public in the daytime.
Mhm.
And people do go. And in the summertime, it is riddled with mosquitoes to the degree that that alone will
We have
keep most
bloopers of
people
that.
away, or
Right.
not have you stick around for too long. I mean, you cannot wear enough DEET to fend off these beasties.
Yeah, what did I call him? Vamp, or no, I say Vlad and his minions. We have bloopers
Vlad and
of
his
it.
minions,
It's funny.
yeah.
But-
Very, very difficult. But we did go there not knowing that that sign existed as well, and I don't think that sign was there maybe 2 years ago, or maybe it read differently. But we had our recorders with us and some cameras. Not like it wasn't a full-blown investigation.
Right.
We are not believers that you need to investigate at night to see a ghost.
Yeah, not at all.
Have
I'm with you.
paranormal experiences. We like investigating during the day, actually, and we have some good stuff. We'll talk about with you sometime. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny. You were talking about the mosquitoes. The Freetown State Forest is the same way. It's like people are always asking me where to go and I say, you're most likely going to run into maybe a spirit here or there, maybe something odd, but a lot of mosquitoes. And I always remember when I went there, I took Jeff Belanger when he was writing Weird Massachusetts there. And I just remember we were going to the Assonet Ledge, which is, in my opinion, the most haunted place in Massachusetts. We were going to the Assonet Ledge, and we were walking from the path from the bottom to the top. And I was like literally slapping handfuls of mosquitoes, and there was nothing on Jeff Belanger whatsoever. And so it just continues my theory that Jeff Belanger has no soul.
At least no blood, right?
Exactly. And of course, he made a big deal of it, and but it was, it was funny just because like these places have such other things that you need to worry about when you go out and look into them than the dead. So
Right.
It's true. That's
Now
funny.
you said you've been to Spider Gates though, but you've never been in.
Nope, I've never been in. So what happened was, me being the weird person that I am, when I went to have my bachelor party, instead of strippers, we decided to go out and look into a case. And this was well before I would consider myself an investigator. So I'm going to put this as a legend trip, which is more of what I do now. And not only did we go to Spider Gates, but I went with my fiance at the time too. So worst bachelor party ever, trust me. And we went out there. We had so we went out there. We had printed all this stuff off the internet, and this must have been, well, it would have been in 2001. We went out there. We had all this stuff printed off the internet. We had cameras, and that's about the extent of it. Like I said, we weren't investigating. We were just looking to experience what Spider Gates had to offer. And we drove all the way out to Worcester, which is probably about an hour and 15 minutes from where I lived. And we were walking down the path. We've got these big old smiles, and this cop car pulls up. And this cop gets out, and I'm not even kidding. I believe her name was Bertha, and she looked like a Bertha. If you know the Worcester police, you might know who I'm talking about. And she said, "What are you guys doing?" And she even had the logo, like, "What are you guys doing?" And we looked, and there was only four of us, and we went, "We're going right down that path right there." She's like, "No, you're not. Get moving." And she literally accompanied us to the Worcester line to get us out of that area. So we never actually were able to get into or Leicester, whatever it is. I was never able to actually get into it.
Yeah.
And so we're driving, and I said, "Why don't we go to Wilton, New Hampshire?" because there's this amazing cemetery in there called Vale End. And so we decided instead, because it was probably about another hour and a half ride. We were already driving. So it's like we went all the way into New Hampshire, into Wilton. We had no idea where the cemetery was. We had no idea where to go. I had some connections in Wilton who I couldn't find. And we were driving around, and this little IROC pulls up behind us, flashing its lights. And we pull over, and these teenagers get out, and they look at us and they say, "Are you guys looking for Vale End?" Like, that's how popular this legend was in that town.
Wow.
And so, Vale End has these really interesting ghost stories. One of them is of Blue Mary, which is this woman named Mary Ritter who was buried, and then her husband remarried another woman. This is kind of like the Chris thing we've got going on. She married another woman named Mary, and when she died, it said that he buried her in the same plot, and just changed the dates on the headstone.
Yeah. That's haunting worthy.
Exactly. So one of those Marys, either Mary 1 or Mary 2, is said to walk the cemetery and glow blue. And the headstone itself is also said to glow blue in the moonlight. And one of the reasons why they stopped people going in there, especially at night, was that people were taking clips of the headstone to see if it would like glow outside of the cemetery and stuff like that. And they also have this really interesting ghost, which is of a man whose daughter died while he was still alive, and he buried her in the family plot. Then he died, and her husband, exhumed the body and moved the body to his family's plot in a different cemetery. And it said that this man walks kind of crying and weeping through the rows of this cemetery, looking at the headstones, trying to find where his daughter is buried, and he can't find her or reunite with her.
That's sad.
Geez.
And those were two really good ghostly legends that I was like, all right, we got to see if we can see these things. And that's how I sold it to the people I was with. But one of the real reasons I wanted to go was because they had the first account I had read on the internet, which ended up being a Pukwudgie. And the Pukwudgie in Vale End are really, really nasty. And I first heard about them on Hollow Hill, which is Fiona Broom's website. And for a long time, she took the report down, but I had read it and printed it off before she had taken it down because people were getting hurt. And she actually attributes the death of one of her friends to an attack that had happened at the cemetery.
Wow.
And we went there, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, I want to see these crazy little furry things that Fiona Broom was talking about. And one of the things about Pukwudgies is they can control the spirits of people that they have killed or that they've been responsible for their death with these little balls of light that they call Tai-Pai-Wunkas. We might call them ghost lights.
Tai-Pai-Wunkas. That's the word I was looking for.
Or Will-o-the-Wisp, if in older folklore. And they use these to lure people into the woods. And I, of course, knew nothing about this at the time. But we're in that cemetery, and I'm watching these little bursts of light in the woods. And I'm like, we need to follow that. We need to go after that. And so we went into the woods, and then the light would appear a little bit further away, and we'd go a little bit further into the woods. And then it would appear a little bit further. We'd go a little bit, and we ended up probably at least 100 yards into the woods in this small town in New Hampshire before I realized, like, guys, something's luring us out here. We need to get back to the main cemetery. And so we went back we made our way back, but the lights kept trying to draw us back. I said, just ignore them and go. And when we got to the middle of the cemetery, you would have thought that we were in the middle of a stadium with paparazzi all around because the lights were just bursting, dozens of them all around us, trying to get us back to go into there. And it was then I was like, this might not be the safest cemetery for us to be in. So I need to make it to the chapel in a few weeks. So why don't we all just leave? And so that was when we decided to get out of there. So
it's an awesome story.
It's a great story.
The lights, so they were like twinkling, or just would flash.
Imagine if you were to see an orb about the size of anywhere between a basketball and like a cantaloupe. So a cantaloupe and a basketball. And what they would do is they would appear, hover, and then go out again. But it would be quick enough that it looked almost like a burst of light sometimes. And of course, they were happening so frequently that it did create that kind of illusion as if like there were cameras going off.
Oh wow, because I was thinking more of the size of like lightning bugs.
No, no, the Tai Wonkas, the size of lightning bugs, was when I went to Indiana. So I saw those ones during my Pukwudgie experience there.
Oh wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love this.
So you think they're kind of what's the word I'm looking for? They go together?
There's a and if you read into the haunted the narrow land, you can actually see that there's actually a little tri thing that goes on. The Tai Wonkas, the Puckwudgies, and then they have these dark spirits which seem to be watchers. So think shadow men kind of thing, but not always in a human-ish kind of form. For example, as we were leaving Vale End, we saw one of these kind of shadow people literally rise out of the ground, and it was more of like a bulking mass than it was like an actual person. But where you see Puckwudgies, you usually see the other two as well. And it's interesting because in the narrow land, you can watch the early tales that they tell. Some of them, they're just called dark spirits or dark men. And then very specifically in the older legends, it switches to the devil. So the devil is associated with these Puckwudgies, and the devil sends these Puckwudgies out to do things. And of course, that coincides with the Christianization and the whole praying Indian aspect of the Wampanoag relationship.
Right. That's what a lot of our podcasts that we're putting out now is on praying towns and.
Right. Yeah, we got some great data from a praying town in Grafton. Was a praying town. It was called Hassanamesset, I think was the original name.
Bless you. Right.
And, yeah, that was one of the original praying towns in Massachusetts. And it's a burial ground there, and it's very interesting stuff. And speaking of that, I've heard you mention about King Philip's belt, and that maybe there's a curse, and that's what the Bridgewater Triangle is about.
Yeah. There's debate on this. I'm a firm believer that the belt is maybe there's a curse going on with the belt, but the issues with the Bridgewater Triangle go before the conflict with the settlers. So before Plymouth and King Philip's War and all that stuff, the Bridgewater Triangle was an area of weirdness. But I think that the curse of the belt is something real. And what happened was is that the Wampanoag had no written history. Their history was an oral history. And part of what they would do is to commemorate specific things that had happened, they would collect shells, or they would collect jewels, or collect something, and they would put them on this belt. And so when we think of a belt, we think of like something to hold up our pants, but imagine something that wraps around someone a few different times. Right. And so as they would tell their history to the younger generation during meetings, they would literally hold their finger over a specific shell or a specific ornament on the belt and tell the history of that moment. And it was a way to track and a way to kind of show the moments of their history, almost like a slideshow, but in belt form, I guess.
Oh, that's great.
Sure.
King Philip had the belt, and he kind of had a premonition. He was kind of like the Braveheart. He was kind of like William Wallace of his day. He had this crazy ability to avoid detection and to know when a trap was set. And he knew that he had been betrayed. He just had a feeling that they were going to catch him. And so he gave it to his military commander, a man by the name of Anawan.
Right.
King Philip does, in fact, get caught. He does get betrayed and caught and is kind of brought in. And then Anawan, a little while later, surrenders to Benjamin Church at the Anawan Rock that your clip was taken from.
Right.
And that's kind of one of this great moment, because they said, nope, if you surrender, everyone's going to be okay. And of course, everyone wasn't. Anawan was killed. The belt was taken from them. So, quite literally, their history was taken from them. We can get all figurative of like how we've taken the narrative away from Native Americans. This is literally taking their history away.
Go ahead.
He was meant to deliver it to Plymouth, who was then going to bring it over or send it over to England. Somewhere along the way, and this is kind of where the national treasure part of the whole story comes in, the belt disappears. Some people say it is in a museum, like in the basement the Royal Museum in England. Other people say it never got there. Other people say it never existed. But there's a strong enough belief in this belt that a lot of Wampanoags have put forth the idea, and actually psychics have put it forth as well, that this curse on the Bridgewater Triangle, the curse in this area will not go away until the belt is returned.
That's really interesting. We were curious about how that may play with the Nipmucs as well, and some of the betrayals that happened there. I mean, King Philip's War was an ugly thing, and even those praying Indians ended up out by Deer Island before the end of the war. Nobody was trusted. You know, as I understand it from what I read, I don't know if it's true, but I think it's Church's writing that Anawan actually surrendered the belt and said, "This belongs to you." And he gave it to him. And apparently Church spent the night with him because it was late and they didn't want to walk back out.
They had dinner.
And had dinner with them. And, you know, he promised them that he would do his best to not have them executed. And I think a lot of them did get away, except for Anawan himself, whose head was staked in Plymouth, the court system.
Over 20 years.
A number of years. They're just rotting. So,
you know, and the
betrayal and you know, thing that goes along with that.
And of course, nothing in the Bridgewater Triangle could be simple. So the next part of that mystery is that Charles Robinson, who wrote the New England Ghost Files, which is like a must-have book for anyone in New England. Everyone, it seems, who looks into the paranormal at all has a copy of that book or has read that book. He also wrote another one, which I can't remember the name of it, but that's where he laid out the whole story about the wampum belt. And of course, he's the one who pulled out a lot of the research having to do with Benjamin Church's writings and things like that. And the odd thing is that since, you know, there's even folklore that's developed around that Charles Robinson was able to identify who might have it. And of course, now he's passed away. And so the information of where that belt might be, now, I've talked to Charles Robinson. Before he died, he does not know where the belt is, but there's this whole kind of added mystique of like, no, Charles Robinson figured it out. Now he's gone, and if only we can unlock his research, and he's mentioned it somewhere, and it's in code in his books and stuff like that. And so it's interesting that this whole folklore around the folklore has developed.
Right, that is interesting. And we just came upon that recently. Actually, it was after our trip to Anawan Rock. That we learned about the belt, or that I at least remembered that there was one.
yeah. I mean, it's cool that stuff. Story and everything kind of coming out of King Philip's War is great fertile ground for ghostly folklore. You know, it has all the elements that we latch onto, and so it's interesting that since my work in the Bridgewater Triangle. Some really interesting people have taken up investigating and doing a lot more historical research than I was able to back in the day. And, every place, it's kind of like, they say every place George Washington ever went to is haunted by George Washington. And it seems like every little nook and cranny now of the Bridgewater Triangle that had some influence or had some kind of aspect of it involved with King Philip's War now has a full-fledged ghost paranormal demonic entity, like Darkness Day, like all of them now are extremely haunted. And it's like, well, where was this when I was writing the book? I could have filled out more pages.
Right. It is an interesting point. It's like Lizzie Borden lived in 2 different houses in Fall River.
Right. She has one here in Swansea near me.
An farm in Swansea, but the Maplecroft, that's in the north end that she lived in after the murders, is also considered to be as haunted as the original Lizzie Borden house that that the murders took place in. So,
and I've always
ghost gets around.
I've always considered Fall River to be part of the Bridgewater Triangle. When Lorne Coleman set it out, he picked 3 spots where the stories kind of stopped for him, and of course he was into cryptids and he was into UFOs, but not so much into the ghosts. And so, it's not that these places were random, but it's just kind of where his stuff stopped. But of course, Fall River, Freetown, which is one of the apexes of the Bridgewater Triangle, Fall River used to be part of Freetown as well as Tiverton, Rhode Island. And so these places are
it's all the same land.
As creepy, exactly, equally as creepy as anything that's within the Coleman Triangle. So
I am kind of convinced, being a former resident of Fall River, growing up in Somerset, and Kristen's from Swansea.
I live here now.
We're King Philip's War actually started.
Right here on our corner.
I think Fall River is cursed. I really
Yeah,
I've
and it's
lived around
interesting.
it or in it my whole life, and there are things that go on in that small, tiny city that you just do not see anywhere. I live near Worcester now, I'm out in Shrewsbury, I'm not too far from Spider Gates. And I mean, I just do not hear the same stories in Worcester that I hear in Fall River.
No. And it's one of those things. I always say, Dark Woods began with a question, and the question was, does the same kind of energy, the same kind of juice that draws paranormal things to an epicenter, does it also cause other bad things to happen? So if you look at places within the triangle, there's a higher rate of teen suicide. There's a higher rate of divorce. 24 has a higher rate of fatal accidents, things like that. And it was like, are those things also impacted? And one of the things I tracked, which you see in areas of high paranormal activity, and the folklorist in me wants to say that they're connected because people need ghost stories to exist when bad things happen, when other bad things happen. But places like Fall River, places like New Bedford, I'm gonna even throw in, even though it's not near it, but it's kind of got the same story, like Gloucester, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
These places should be more successful than they are, and they have these weird rises and falls where just at the point where they're about to kind of break even and even kind of go upward, something tragic happens that constantly keeps the town down. And you have to wonder whether these places are cursed. Now, if there's any, is it a coincidence that those are also these places where a lot more paranormal activity happens, where a lot more things that are unexplained happen? I don't think that that's a coincidence. Like, that's one of the things that Dark Woods explores. Why do serial killers find the same place that zombies are reported? That those two things shouldn't exist, but they might, because there's something that draws them. There's something soiled about the land itself.
I read that part of the Dark Woods insert. That right there, what you said about the zombies.
Right. It's almost like there's a window. It's one of those window areas.
Right. A portal.
Things seem to occur, and a lot of people say that about Freetown Forest, which of course has everything Bigfoot to UFOs to, how many bodies are dumped there. And I know you talked to Alan Alves, who we also know,
right,
a lot about that during the time and researching this, and
right,
he attested that there were numerous bodies, more so than maybe people realize.
Yeah, I mean, my first posting ever about Freetown was called the Paranormal Dumping Ground, because it seemed like not only was that the place where there were more bodies than could ever be found, but also where the paranormal stories went to die. That there was just so much going on there that like everything was just kind of thrown in together there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. What are you up to now? Because I know we're coming to a close, and I wanted to spend more time on what you've been up to, because you're in Florida, and
sure,
you moved out of the Triangle. You got the hell out of here.
Yes, and unfortunately, I didn't find any place near as normal. So I live in Florida now. I do a show, like I said, called Tripping on Legends. And what it does is it embraces the idea of legend tripping over investigating. And so what we do is we track a ghostly legend or a ghostly story that's being told in a town in Florida. We research, what is the legend about? How is the legend impacted the community that tells it? Ghost stories tell us much more about the teller than it does about any kind of ghost. And then we go out to that town and we try to experience whatever the legend says happened. And so we usually find some kind of trigger, some kind of hook into the story itself. We go to that location and we try to just experience. So rather than trying to capture a ghost, we do record everything that we do. And I've actually gotten more evidence as a legend tripper than as an investigator. But that's not our primary concern. Our primary concern is to be in the moment and to have the ghostly experience that other people have had while they've been there.
Wow, you are brave.
Well, like you were saying, I use this as I have an extension of that's called Tripping on Legends with Kids, where I go out, my old co-host, we would go out with her kids, we would go out with my kids. I'm actually planning a big trip as our spring break next week. My kids and I are hitting about 7 different legends in the panhandle of Florida and leading into the panhandle of Florida. And I use it as a way to teach them things like research, teach them about the history of the area, teach them about Native Americans. Because in Florida,
Sure.
we think of New England as Native American, capital of the world or capital of the country. But there's a lot of lore here in Florida as well. And of course, very specific conflicts like the Seminole Wars that are responsible for a lot of the legends and the ghosts down here as well.
Mhm.
And so I use that as a way to teach them kind of about everything, how to interview people, how to take good pictures. And so it's an educational thing as well. And so, we've got a big trip planned next week. So I'm excited to be posting stuff on that. So people should follow up with us.
Wow, that's awesome.
Awesome.
Yes.
I would love that. I would imagine that Columbus may have had more to do with those hauntings than, say, the Pilgrims.
Well, it's a lot of it's DeSoto. DeSoto is like the dirty word down here. He really did some nasty stuff, and Hernando, and you find it's funny because everything here is named after those people.
Yeah.
And yet they are some of the nastiest people. There's a huge difference between the Spanish and the English. The English were more slick in some ways. They were like, we're just going to convert you to Christianity to take your land. Whereas the Spanish were like, oh, wow, there might be gold. Let's slaughter everybody.
Right.
It only occurred to the English after the fact. So there's a lot more massacres and a lot more bloodshed here in Florida at the hands of explorers than there is necessarily in New England.
Right.
Yeah, no, I can believe that. And we know a little bit about the history of the Spanish invasion, and it is absolutely horrifying.
Yeah. It's the whole idea of the conquistadors versus settlers, So,
Right.
So a lot of the stories that we track ends up being like, oh, and this weird thing also has something to do with, and like I said, DeSoto's like the big bad guy down here. Oh, this is also connected to that somehow. And you find these connections, and there are just as many weird and unexplained things going on here in Florida. You were talking about Tampa earlier. They of course have the Tampa Triangle.
Do they really?
Well, yeah. It's not as well defined, but that area of Florida, especially, I did a over near Halloween. That county actually asked me, can you do a show here for like an hour and a half that's just things that are within like 10 miles? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've got like 30 of them. So, and these are not like haunted buildings. These are like places people can go to themselves and experience it themselves. And she was like, really? And I'm like, yeah, we're going to have fun. Don't worry about it, hon.
Oh, I'm going to have to tell my daughter, Elizabeth. She's going to like that.
Awesome. Yeah, she's in Tampa.
Yeah, she just moved there.
So where can people find you, Chris?
What's the best place? I've switched it up a little bit. I was hesitant to this, but the best place to find it is Facebook. That's really the kind of area where everything gets filtered through now. So it's facebook.com/trippingonlegends. And then, of course, Tripping on Legends. And then, of course, you can go to trippingonlegends.wordpress.com. And I always say, which my students find hilarious because they're always pulling up weird pictures of me. If you go to the internet and type in Christopher Balzano, you're going to find Tripping on Legends. And so it's and you're going to find a lot of weird pictures that my students then make the screensavers of their computers.
Oh, that's so cute.
That's awesome.
Yes.
What grades do you teach?
I teach freshmen primarily. I teach English 1 now. So they find the pictures when I was about 40 pounds heavier and bald. They love to.
Yeah.
I can see a freshman getting off on that.
Oh, yeah.
Horrible pictures of me have been snapped more than just about anybody in this county, I would say.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we really appreciate it. We're running a little over. I know we started a little late, but we got to make some room. We got Seraphine and Laura Lee coming up on Trippin' and Void.
Also from this area.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. But we have to thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Christopher Balzano, he's a writer, researcher, folklorist, and he's the host of Tripping on Legends.
And I've heard him legendary. So
And you are legendary. You are legendary. I know those are all out on Amazon.
And my new one's coming out. So Florida's Haunted Love Stories is coming out in the next few months. So I'll have you back on so I can plug. Yeah.
That was one of the things I wanted to ask you about tonight. I didn't get to what the Haunted Love Project was about.
So that means, would you like to come back on our show again at one point?
I would love to come back on your show at any point you guys want me on.
Awesome. Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, we'll
thank you, Chris, so much.
We appreciate
Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful night.
You too. Thank you.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Bigfoot
And the Bunny.
We'd like to thank Joe Montaldo for his engineering and support.
Thank you, Joe.
Be sure to look for us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter.
You can also find us at Dark Horse Paranormal and Purple Raven Paranormal by searching those very same outlets. You can email us at bigfootandthebunny@gmail.com. Thank you.
Catch you later.
Bye.